The Dakota winter of 1877 wasn't just cold, it was a judgment. It was a white, silent animal that smothered the world. And in that world, the widow Ellie Hayes was entirely alone. Her nearest neighbor was 12 miles of ice. The town of Prosperity Creek was 20. The only law was the howl of the wind and the loaded Spencer rifle over her fireplace. She was checking her traps, fighting a wind that stole her breath, when she found him. Not a trapper, not a soldier. A Lakota warrior, half buried in a snowdrift, a frozen sculpture of blood and buckskin. The rules of the plains were simple. Leave him. He was the enemy, the shadow her people feared. But Ellie Hayes was about to break every rule. She didn't know his name. She didn't know he was betrayed, and she could not possibly know that in saving this one dying man, she was forging the most enduring and dangerous legend of the High Plains. The silence of the High Plains in deep winter is a sound you can feel in your bones. It was a physical weight, a pressure against the ears. For Ellie Hayes, that silence had been her only companion for 34 days, ever since the blizzard, the White Death, had sealed the passes and buried her small homestead under an ocean of snow. Her world had shrunk to the 4 walls of the cabin her late husband, Thomas, had built, and the 50-yard path to the livestock lean-to. Thomas. The name was a cold stone in her heart. He'd been gone a year, taken by a lung fever that had burned through him faster than a prairie fire. He had loved this hard, unforgiving land. He'd seen beauty in the endless sky, where Ellie now only saw emptiness. He had respected the Lakota, the people who had been here first, a sentiment that had made him an outcast in Prosperity Creek long before his death. "They're just people, Ellie," he'd say, "bound by the same sky." Now she was bound only by the snow. On the 35th day, the wind stopped. The silence that followed was louder, more profound. It was a holding of breath. The sun was a pale, useless disk in a steel-grey sky. Ellie pulled her wool-lined cloak tight, Thomas's old cloak. It still smelled faintly of him, of tobacco and pine, and took the Spencer rifle from its pegs. "Just checking the traps," she whispered to the empty cabin. The sound of her own voice was a shock. The snow was packed hard, a crust that groaned under her boots. Each breath was a cloud of white fog. She carried a shovel, not just for the traps, but in case she found a drift she couldn't climb. The landscape was unrecognizable, the familiar gullies and ridges smoothed into a vast rolling sheet of white. She found the first trap empty. The second, the same. It was the third near the frozen creek bed where she saw it. At first it was just a stain, a dark, ugly smear of copper and rust against the blue-white of a drift. Her heart hammered against her ribs. A wolf? A deer taken by cats? She edged closer, the rifle suddenly heavy in her frozen mittens. It was not an animal. It was a man. He was face down, one arm flung out as if reaching for something. He wore buckskin leggings and a buffalo hide shirt, frozen stiff. A cascade of black hair, matted with snow and frozen blood, lay across his back. A single, battered eagle feather was tied into it. Lakota. Ellie's blood ran colder than the air. This was the nightmare the town preacher warned of. The red savage, the hostile. Every instinct screamed, "Go, run, go back to the cabin, bolt the door. He is dead." She raised the rifle, her finger trembling on the trigger. He didn't move. Of course he was dead. No man could survive this. The blood stain near his side was vast. She took another step, prodding his shoulder with the rifle barrel. A sound escaped him. It was not a word. It was a low, agonized hiss of breath, a bubble of sound that burst in the freezing air. He was alive. Ellie Hayes stood frozen. This was not a man, not really. This was a problem. This was a death sentence. If she helped him, she was a traitor. If the army found out, they would burn her homestead. If his own people found him here, they would likely kill her and take her supplies. If he woke, he might kill her himself. "Leave him," the plains whispered. "It's the law. It's survival." She looked at the sky. It was turning a deeper, bruised purple at the edges. More snow was coming. This wasn't just a man, it was a dying man. "Damn you, Thomas," she whispered, tears freezing on her eyelashes. "Damn you for teaching me to be soft." She looked at the man's back. The snow around him was melted in a shallow depression from the last remnant of his body heat. He had been here for a long time. Hours. Maybe a day. The sheer impossibility of his survival struck her. She jammed the butt of her rifle into the snow and knelt. With rough, clumsy movements, she put her mittened hands on his shoulder and hip and rolled him over. His face was a mask of frozen blood and ice. His eyes were closed, his lips blue and cracked, but it was a strong face, even in near death. A high-bridged nose, a broad jaw. He looked to be about her age, perhaps 30. There was a long, shallow gash on his cheek, black with frostbite. His side. She pushed aside the stiff hide. It was a terrible, gaping wound, a mix of a gunshot and something else. It was packed with snow, a desperate, last-ditch effort to stop the bleeding. He was dying. He would be dead in an hour. "Lord, forgive me," she said. But she wasn't sure if she was asking forgiveness for what she was about to do, or for the part of her that wanted to walk away. She unslung the shovel. It wasn't a sled, but it was wide and flat. She levered the man's limp, heavy body onto the metal bed of the shovel. He weighed more than she could have imagined, a dead weight of muscle and frozen hide. She grabbed the handle and pulled. He didn't move. She pulled again, her boots slipping, her lungs burning. The man's body slid off. "No," she grunted, resetting him. This time she unhooked the length of rope from her belt. She looped it under his arms, tied it to the shovel handle, and then wrapped the other end around her own waist. She leaned forward, bracing herself like a mule pulling a plow. The snow groaned. The shovel moved. It took her 2 hours to cover the 70 yards back to the cabin. She fell 3 times. By the time she reached the small, covered porch, she was sobbing, not from emotion, but from sheer, agonizing exhaustion. The sky had opened up, and the world was once again a vortex of white. She unhitched herself, stumbled inside, and grabbed the rough wool blanket from her own bed. She dragged him, inch by inch, over the threshold. She slammed the heavy oak door and dropped the bar. The silence of the cabin rushed in, broken only by her ragged breathing and the drip, drip, drip of melting, bloody snow onto her husband's pine plank floor. The white silence was broken. She had brought the war, the wilderness, and the shadow of death itself into her home. The first 3 days were a blur of fever and fear. The cabin, once her sanctuary, became a prison cell shared with a ghost. Ellie worked with a grim, frantic energy. She cut away the frozen buckskin, her hands shaking as she revealed the extent of the damage. It was worse than she thought. A bullet had passed clean through his side, high on the ribs, a wound that should have killed him, but had missed the lung. But there was another, more vicious wound below it, a deep, jagged puncture, a knife thrust, crusted with black, frozen blood. He had been shot, and then he had been stabbed. This wasn't a battle, it was an execution. She boiled snow on the cast-iron stove, the cabin filling with thick steam. She washed him, her movements practical, devoid of modesty. His body was a road map of old scars, lean and hard, but now ravaged by exposure. His skin was so cold it felt like stone. She packed the wounds with the last of her precious yarrow and wrapped them in strips torn from her own bed linens. She forced lukewarm broth laced with willow bark tea for the fever between his cracked lips. Most of it dribbled out. He never stirred, but only muttered in a language she didn't understand, guttural, desperate sounds. She sat in the rocker by the stove, the Spencer rifle across her lap, and watched him. She did not sleep for 2 days. Who was he? What had he done? And who had done this to him? On the 3rd night, the fever broke. Ellie had dozed off in the chair, her head snapping back as a sound split the room. A sharp intake of breath, her eyes flew open. He was awake. He was staring at her. His eyes were dark, not black, but the deepest brown, and they were filled with a wild, terrifying light. He was propped up on one elbow, his hand clutching the blanket. She raised the rifle, the click-click of the hammer echoing in the small space. "Don't," she said, her voice a dry croak. Stay down." He didn't seem to understand the words, but he understood the rifle. He looked at the gun, then at her. He said something, a single sharp word, "Sapan." He collapsed back onto the pallet, his chest heaving. The panic was gone, replaced by a profound, weary understanding. He looked at the bandages on his side, then at the fire, then at her. He was too weak to be a threat. He was a prisoner of her charity. They existed this way for a week. The blizzard raged again, sealing them in. They were two enemies, trapped in an ark, floating on a sea of snow. She learned his name. She pointed to her own chest. "Ellie." He watched her, his gaze unnerving. He was weak, but he was aware. He pointed to himself. "Akacheta." "Cheta," she tried. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. She taught him words. Water. Stew. Fire. He learned them instantly, his pronunciation clear. He was intelligent, watchful. He said little, but his eyes followed her everywhere. The fear began to recede, replaced by a tense curiosity. There was a vulnerability beneath the warrior's pride. She saw it when he struggled to sit up, his face contorting in pain, but no sound escaping him. She saw it in the way his eyes tracked the door, a haunted, hunted look. On the 8th day, the snow stopped. The world outside was blindingly bright, and with the clear sky came the sound Ellie had been dreading, the crunch of hooves in packed snow, the jingle of a bridle. Akacheta heard it too. He tensed, his hand instinctively going to the knife she had left on the small table, the one she used for cutting salt pork. "No," she hissed. She grabbed the knife and pointed to the small, dark root cellar hatch built into the floor under her bed. "In. Now." "Hush." He understood. He swung his legs over, his face pale with the effort. He slipped into the dark, earthen hole, just as a heavy fist pounded on the door. Ellie kicked the pallet and blankets under the bed, smoothed her skirt, and took a deep breath. She unbarred the door. Sheriff Brody stood on the porch, his face red from the cold, his thick mustache crusted with ice. Behind him stood Jaden Croft, the town's biggest rancher, his small, piggish eyes taking in everything. "Mrs. Hayes," Brody said, his voice a low rumble. He wasn't a bad man, but he was a tired one. "Just checking on the outlying homesteads. Been a rough one." "Sheriff, Mr. Croft," Ellie nodded, blocking the doorway. "As you can see, I'm fine. The Lord provides." "He provides for those who provide for themselves," Croft said, his voice oily. He craned his neck, trying to see past her. "You burnin' a powerful lot of wood, Ellie. That chimney's been puffin' like a steam engine for a week." Ellie's heart stopped. "It's cold, Mr. Croft. I prefer not to freeze." Of course, Brody cut in, stamping his boots. We had a report. Some activity over by the Double D. Sapan's band. You know the one. Renegades. Caused a lot of trouble up north. Just be aware. Keep that rifle handy. Sapan. The word Akacheta had spoken. I always do, Sheriff, Ellie said. Croft's eyes narrowed. He sniffed the air. Smells different. You've been sick, Ellie. Smells like sickness. Just a touch of fever, Mr. Croft. Nothing I can't handle. Brody nodded, clearly wanting to leave. Well, good to see you're safe. We'll be moving on. Got to check on the Millers. Sheriff, Croft said. Not moving. He pointed a gloved finger at the floor, near the hearth. What's that? Ellie looked down. A single, dark drop of blood. She felt the blood drain from her own face. I cut myself, she said, wrapping her hand in her apron. Butchering a rabbit. Croft smiled, a thin, unpleasant expression. He knew she was lying. He didn't know the truth, but he knew this was a lie. A rabbit, you say? Right. Well, you take care, widow. It's a dangerous world for a woman alone. He tipped his hat and turned. Brody gave her one last, lingering look, a look of confusion and pity, before following. Ellie barred the door, her knees weak. She waited until the sound of the horses faded completely. She lifted the hatch. Akacheta emerged, his face grim. He pointed to the door. Brody, he said, the name clear. Sheriff Brody, Ellie corrected, her voice shaking. Akacheta then pointed again, his expression darkening. Croft. He said the name like a curse. Then he looked at the spot of blood he had left, and then at her. He knew, without a word, the danger she was in. He had seen the way Croft looked at her. He walked unsteadily to the hearth. He picked up the poker, feeling its weight. He was a warrior again, however wounded. He was no longer just a patient. He was a protector. And in that moment, Ellie realized the dynamic in the tiny cabin had shifted forever. The shared danger from Croft's visit built a bridge. The cabin was no longer a hospital, it was a fortress. The fear between them was replaced by a fragile, unspoken alliance. Akacheta's strength returned with astonishing speed. He was, Ellie realized, a man of profound physical and mental discipline. He began to help her, splitting kindling with sharp, economical blows, hauling water. He moved with a silent grace that made the tiny cabin feel larger. He was teaching her, too. He showed her how to read the subtle changes in the snow, how to bank the fire so it would last the night with minimal wood. One evening, he was sitting by the fire, inspecting his healing wound. Ellie was mending Thomas's cloak, the one she had worn to find him. Akacheta pointed to the cloak. Thomas, he said. It wasn't a question. Ellie nodded, surprised he had learned the name. My husband, he is dead. She pointed to the ground. Akacheta was silent for a long time. His eyes scanned the cabin, lingering on the shelf above the hearth. On it sat a carved willow wood box. It was the one thing of Thomas's she couldn't bear to put away. Akacheta stood, walked to the shelf, and touched the box. He looked at her, asking permission. Puzzled, Ellie nodded. He lifted the lid. Inside was Thomas's most private collection. A small, intricately beaded pouch, a piece of polished blue stone, and a long-stemmed pipe, its bowl carved from red pipestone. Akacheta stared at the pipe as if he'd seen a ghost. He lifted it with a reverence Ellie had never seen. He ran a thumb over the bowl. Then he spoke, not in the simple English words she had taught him, but in a low, rapid stream of Lakota. He held the pipe out to her, his eyes searching her face. I don't understand, she said. He took a deep breath, searching for the words. Where, Thomas? Get. This? From a friend, Ellie said, gesturing vaguely west. He traded. He liked the Lakota. He said they were honorable. Akacheta closed his eyes. He spoke a name soft as a prayer. White man's blanket. He looked at her, his eyes intense. White blanket, Ellie gasped. That was the name. The name Thomas had told her. The name the Lakota had given him. He had helped negotiate a small, local truce 2 summers ago, allowing settlers and his local band to pass the same river valley without bloodshed. You knew him, Ellie whispered. Akacheta nodded. He pointed to himself. Akacheta. Then he pointed to the pipe, then to his own chest. Thomas. Cola. Friend. The room seemed to spin. The man she had saved, the hostile she had hidden, was not a stranger. He was a friend of her dead husband. Thomas had likely held this very pipe, sat by a fire with this very man. The world, which had felt so vast and empty, suddenly became terrifyingly small. This connection, this ghost of her husband, changed everything. Akacheta was no longer a burden or a threat. He was a link to her past. He was, in a strange way, family. This fragile peace lasted 3 days. Then, Jaden Croft returned. This time, he didn't bring the sheriff. He came alone, riding a big bay gelding. He didn't knock. He dismounted, strode onto the porch, and pushed the door open without invitation. Ellie was kneading dough. Akacheta was in the lean-to, checking on her mule. "Croft!" Ellie spun, flour dusting her front. "You have no right." "I have every right, widow," he sneered, his eyes darting around the room. He was looking for something. "This is a dangerous time. We heard Sapan's band hit the Miller farm, burned it. They're missing. The town is on edge. And that gives you leave to break into my home?" "I'm on the Citizens' Council," he said, puffing his chest. "Sheriff Brody is a good man, but he's soft. We're forming a militia. I'm here to offer you a final chance to sell." "I am not selling." "Don't be a fool, woman," he snapped. "A lone woman out here? When Sapan's on the loose? You'll be murdered in your bed. I'm offering you a fair price. $500 for the whole section. Take it and go back east where you belong. This is where I belong. This was my husband's home. It's mine. Now get out." Croft's face darkened. "I tried to be neighborly. You're stubborn, Ellie. And you're a liar. What did you say?" "I know you're not alone." His voice dropped. "Brody might have believed your rabbit story. I didn't." He took a step closer. Ellie grabbed the rolling pin, her knuckles white. "I know what you are," he whispered, his breath sour with whiskey. "You're one of them, an Injun lover. Just like that fool husband of yours. Thomas Hayes. He's the one who brought this trouble, making treaties, filling their heads with ideas. He got what he deserved." "Get out," Ellie said, her voice shaking with rage. "And now you're hiding one, aren't you? Found him, did you? Sapan's band? Or just some stray buck you've taken a fancy to?" He lunged, not for her, but for the bed. He kicked the pallet aside. He saw the hatch to the root cellar. "Well, well, well," he breathed, a triumphant, ugly smile spreading across his face. "What are we hiding in the dark?" He reached for the iron ring on the hatch. "I said," a new voice said, low and cold as the wind, "Get out." Croft froze. He turned, slowly. Akacheta stood in the doorway. He was not the broken man from the snow. He held the small hatchet Ellie used for kindling. He was barefoot, silent. His eyes were not the eyes of a patient. They were the eyes of a warrior. They were the eyes of a man who had come back from the dead. Croft's face went pale. He hadn't just found a hiding Indian. He had found a nightmare. "So," Croft stammered, trying to regain his bluster. "It's true, you're harboring a hostile." "He is my guest," Ellie said, stepping beside Akacheta. "Guest," Akacheta repeated, testing the word. He pointed the hatchet at Croft. "You. Leave, now." Croft looked from Akacheta to Ellie. He saw the rolling pin in her hand, the hatchet in his. He saw the shared, unified defiance. His bravado evaporated, replaced by a snake-like cunning. "This changes things, Ellie," he hissed. "This changes everything. You've made your choice. You're a traitor to your own kind." He backed out of the cabin, his hand slightly raised. He climbed onto his horse, his eyes never leaving Akacheta. "You'll hang for this, both of you," he spat. "When the militia gets here, we'll see how tough you are." He wheeled his horse and galloped away, kicking up plumes of snow. Ellie and Akacheta stood in the doorway, watching him go. The cold air rushed in, but the cabin had never felt hotter. "He will come back," Akacheta said. It wasn't a warning. It was a fact. "I know," Ellie said, her heart sinking. "He will bring many. The militia." "Yes." Akacheta looked at her, his face a mask of grim resolve. "I must go. Tonight. But first, you must know why." He walked to the hearth, knelt, and scooped up a handful of cold ash from the firebox. He spread it on the floor. "You must know," he said, his voice hard. "Who Sapan really is." The cabin was dark, lit only by the low, flickering flames in the stove. The wind had risen again, moaning around the eaves. Akacheta knelt on the floor, his face illuminated from below, making him look like a figure from a ghost story. He used his finger to draw in the fine grey ash. "This," he said, drawing a circle, "is my people, the Oglala." He drew a smaller circle inside it. "My family." He began to speak, and Ellie realized with a jolt that he had been hiding the truth from her. Not just his connection to Thomas, but his understanding of English. It was not perfect, not fluent, but it was far, far more than the simple words she had taught him. He had been listening. He had been learning. "I am Akacheta, warrior, leader. I follow my father. My father followed his." He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "I knew Thomas. He was white man's blanket. He wanted peace. I wanted peace. The buffalo are going. The world is changing. War is easy. Peace is hard. It is a fight, every day." He then drew another figure, a simple stick man, next to his own. "This is Sapan, black, my cousin." His voice filled with a venom Ellie had not heard before. "Sapan, he does not want peace. He wants war. He wants the glory of the old days. He says peace is weakness. He says Thomas and I are weak." Akacheta's hand clenched in the ash. There was a council. The snows were deep. Our people were hungry. Sapan wanted to raid, to attack. He gestured toward the town. Prosperity Creek. For food, for guns, for honor. "I said no," Akacheta continued, his voice dropping. "I spoke of Thomas. I spoke of the truce. I said we honor our word. The elders, they listened to me." Sapan was shamed. His finger moved, drawing a new scene. 2 figures and then 2 more, smaller. He came to me. He said I was right. He said we would hunt, just us. For the people. To show strength. He brought 2 friends, men who follow him. He drew a line, a path, leading away from the circle of his people. We rode for a day, into the hills. A blizzard was coming. Sapan knew. He trapped me. Akacheta's voice was thick with the shame of the memory. "They shot me." He touched his side. From behind. The horse fell. I was trapped. Sapan, he came close. He looked down at me. Akacheta's face was a mask of cold fury. He said, "The weak will feed the crows. Now I am chief." He took my knife. Ellie gasped. "The other wound." "Yes," Akacheta nodded. He stabbed me. To finish. He left me for the snow, to be buried. He took my horse, my rifle." He smeared the ash, wiping the drawing away. But the snow, it saved me. He struggled for the word. It packed the wound. The cold stopped the blood. I crawled. I do not know how long. I crawled until you found me. Ellie sat, her mind reeling. This was not a random act of violence. This was a betrayal, a story as old as the world. Cain and Abel played out in the snow. So Sapan, he is not just a hostile, Ellie realized. He is the new leader. Yes, he will tell our people I am dead. Killed by you, by soldiers. He will use my death to start his war. He will attack Prosperity Creek. He will use my name to make them follow. Now Ellie understood the true danger. Sapan was not just a renegade. He was a usurper, a warmonger, and he had a personal, powerful story to fuel his hatred. And Jaden Croft, in his ignorant greed, was about to light the fuse. He must be stopped, Akacheta said. He stood, the movement pained but powerful. I must go back. I must show my people I am alive. I must show them Sapan is a liar. Go back, Ellie cried. You're barely standing, and Croft will be back with his militia. You won't make it to the pass. I must. His resolve was absolute. He walked to the door and looked out at the swirling snow. Sapan, he thinks I am dead. Croft thinks I am weak. They are both wrong. Ellie knew he was right. He had to go. But she also knew he would die. He had no food, no weapon save a hatchet, no warm clothes. She looked at the Spencer rifle over the hearth. She looked at the pegs where Thomas's warmest buffalo coat still hung. She looked at the lean-to, where her last mule and Thomas's prized horse, Pilgrim, were sheltered. This was the true test. Thomas had given his word to Akacheta's people. Now, she was being asked to give everything else. She made her decision. If you are going, she said, her voice firm, you will not go as a beggar. She worked quickly. She packed dried meat, hardtack, and a pouch of her willow bark tea. She pulled Thomas's heavy coat from the peg and handed it to him. It fit him well. She took the Spencer rifle down and the box of 50 caliber cartridges. I cannot, Akacheta said, his eyes wide. This is Thomas. Thomas is dead, Ellie said, her voice breaking for the first time. His word is not. If you are his cola, you will take his horse and his rifle, and you will honor him. You will stop this. She led him to the lean-to. The wind ripped at the door. Pilgrim, a strong grey gelding, whinnied softly. Akacheta placed a hand on the horse's neck, and the animal calmed instantly. He mounted the horse, the rifle slotted into the saddle scabbard. He looked down at her. The snow whipped around them. He was no longer a patient. He was a warrior, mounted, armed, and ready. He was the man from the snow, but reborn in fire and iron. He didn't say, "Thank you." The words were too small. Instead, he reached down and placed his hand over his heart. "Ellie," he said. The name was a vow. Then he looked past her, toward Prosperity Creek, his face hardening. "Croft comes. Soon." What about me?" she whispered, the cold suddenly piercing her. "Bar the door. Hide. Do not fight. Not for this house. It is just wood. You live." He pulled the horse's head around. "Akacheta!" she called out. He paused. "Good luck," she whispered. He nodded once. Then he kicked the horse, and Pilgrim lunged into the sea of white, disappearing into the storm almost instantly. Ellie Hayes stood alone, watching him go. She was left with a cold cabin, an empty stall, and no rifle. She had saved a man from the brink of death, only to send him back to what was surely his end. And she had, she feared, just signed her own death warrant. She went inside and dropped the bar on the door. Prosperity Creek was a town built on fear and rumor. It was 27 buildings huddled together on the frozen plain, a tiny island of civilization in a sea of grass and sky. Its lifeline was the saloon, the general store, and the sheriff's office, and that is where Jaden Croft began his work. He stormed into the Golden Nugget Saloon, his face purple with manufactured rage, his clothes still dusted with the snow from his ride. "He's got her!" Croft roared, slamming his fist on the bar. The saloon went quiet. The tinkling of the out-of-tune piano stopped. "Who's got who, Jaden?" asked Jed, the bartender, wiping a glass. "That widow, Ellie Hayes. She's been taken. Or worse, she's joined 'em." A murmur ran through the dozen men in the room. "What are you talking about?" a miner asked, setting down his cards. "I rode out to check on her like a good neighbor," Croft bellowed, playing to the room. "And I found her. With him. A Lakota buck. Armed. In her cabin, bold as brass. He threatened me. Drove me off. This was a lie, but it was a good lie. It was the lie they wanted to hear." "Sapan's band," a man whispered from the corner. "He's one of Sapan's." "Must be," Croft agreed. "The one who hit the Miller place. He's holding her hostage, or she's turned. A traitor, just like her husband." That set the hook. Thomas Hayes had never been popular. His peace was seen as cowardice. "What's to be done?" "Brody," Croft yelled. "Where's the damn sheriff? He's soft. He won't do what's necessary." As if summoned, Sheriff Brody pushed through the saloon doors, his face grim. "Jaden, I heard you shouting from my office. What is this?" "This," Croft said, pointing a finger at the sheriff's chest, "is what you failed to stop. Ellie Hayes is harboring a hostile, the same hostile, I'd wager, who killed the Millers. He's armed, and he's at her homestead. Right now." Brody's weary eyes met Croft's. He remembered the blood drop. He remembered Ellie's shaking hands. "You saw him, Jaden? For a fact?" "With my own eyes. A big, mean-looking buck, had a hatchet, looked ready to take my scalp. She defended him, Brody. Said he was her guest." The room exploded. "Traitor! Injun lover! She's put us all at risk. Now hold on," Brody said, holding up his hands. "We don't know the full story. I'll ride out. I'll talk to her." "Talk!" Croft laughed, a bitter, barking sound. "Talk is what Thomas Hayes did, and he's in a box. That thing out there needs a rope, not a conversation, and so does she, for betraying her own." "That's enough, Jaden," Brody's voice cut through the noise. "I'm the law here." "The law's too slow, Sheriff," Croft shot back. He turned to the crowd. "He's part of Sapan's war band. He's a scout. He's probably signaling the rest of 'em right now. They're coming for the town, for our wives, our children." It was a master stroke of manipulation. He wasn't just talking about one woman and one Indian. He was talking about their families. Panic, cold and sharp, flashed through the room. "He's right," the miner yelled. "We gotta ride. We gotta stop 'em before they get here." "I'm forming a militia," Croft declared, climbing onto a bar stool. "Like I said, who's with me? Who's gonna protect this town, even if the law won't?" Men surged forward. "I'm in. Give me a rifle. My horse is at the livery." "Jaden, you are not doing this," Brody said, his hand moving toward his pistol. "You're gonna start a war, you fool." "The war's already started, Sheriff," Croft sneered. "You can either join us, or you can get out of the way." "But we are riding. We're gonna burn that cabin to the ground and hang whatever's inside. It's the only way to send Sapan a message." Sheriff Brody looked at the faces in the crowd. They were not his deputies. They were a mob. He saw the fear, the bloodlust. He knew he couldn't stop them. If he tried, they'd likely run him over. He made a split-second, pragmatic choice. All right, I'll lead the posse. But we do this my way. We go. We surround the cabin. We demand their surrender. No one fires unless I give the order. Is that understood?" Croft smiled, knowing he had already won. "Whatever you say, Sheriff, as long as we get it done." Within 20 minutes, a posse of 15 men was mounted in the street. They were not a posse. They were a lynch mob. They were armed with rifles, shotguns, and a burning, righteous certainty. Jaden Croft, riding at the front next to a reluctant Sheriff Brody, had never felt so powerful. "To the Hayes homestead," Croft roared, brandishing a torch he'd lit from the saloon stove. "For Prosperity Creek." The mob thundered out of town, a dark-armed serpent against the snow, heading straight for Ellie's home. Ellie heard them coming. It wasn't a sound at first, but a vibration in the frozen earth, a low, thrumming pulse that grew into the thunder of hooves. She ran to the small window, wiping the frost from the pane. They were a black mass on the horizon, emerging from the grey twilight. 15 riders. At the front, she could clearly see Jaden Croft, holding a lit torch. "Bar the door. Hide. Do not fight. It is just wood. You live." Akacheta's words. She dropped the heavy oak bar into its brackets. She blew out her lantern, plunging the cabin into near darkness. She grabbed the one weapon she had left, the fireplace poker, and retreated to the darkest corner, her heart a trapped bird against her ribs. The riders fanned out, surrounding the cabin. "Ellie Hayes!" Sheriff Brody's voice boomed. "Come out with your hands raised, and send the hostile out first." Ellie held her breath. The silence stretched. "She ain't comin', Sheriff." Croft's voice, full of venom. "She's made her bed." "Ellie," Brody called again. "Don't make this worse. We just want the man. Give him up, and you won't be harmed." Give him up. He was gone. They were here for a ghost. "She's not talking," another man yelled. "Let's burn it. Burn 'em out." "Hold your fire," Brody commanded. "I see her mule in the lean-to. She's in there. Croft, you and 2 men, check the lean-to. The rest of you, hold your positions." Ellie heard boots crunching in the snow, the squeal of the lean-to door. "Sheriff!" Croft's voice was triumphant. "The big grey horse is gone, but the mule is here, and... what's this? The rifle is gone, too. She armed him, Brody. She armed the savage and sent him on his way." This was it. The mob didn't need any more proof. A roar of rage went up. "She's a traitor! He's gone! He's gone to get the rest of 'em! Burn it! Burn it now!" "No!" Brody yelled, but his voice was lost. Jaden Croft rode his horse back to the front of the cabin, his torch held high. "This is traitor's land now. It's forfeit. We burn the nest to kill the snake." He tossed the torch onto the roof of the small, covered porch. The dry, winter-cured wood, coated in pitch, caught instantly. Flames licked up the side of the cabin. Smoke began to curl under the door. Ellie choked, backing away. The cabin was filling with acrid smoke. "It is just wood. You live." She had to get out, but the only way out was into the guns of the mob. Crack! The sound was not the fire. It was a rifle shot. It was louder, sharper than anything. It came from the ridge to the north. One of the men in the posse screamed and dropped his rifle, clutching his hand. The shot had been perfect, shattering the stock of his gun. "Ambush!" a man screamed. "It's Sapan! They're here!" The posse panicked, scattering, diving for cover behind their horses. "Where did it come from?" Brody yelled, pulling his pistol and ducking behind his horse. Crack! Another shot. This one hit the tin bucket by the well, sending it spinning. "From the ridge!" Croft yelled, his voice now tight with real fear. "It's just one man. See him? He's on a grey horse." Ellie ran to the window. On the ridge, silhouetted against the dying light, was a lone rider. Akacheta. He hadn't gone. He had circled back. He had waited. "It's him! The one from the cabin!" Croft raged. "He's got the widow's rifle! Kill him! Kill him!" Several men fired wildly toward the ridge, their bullets kicking up snow far short of the target. Akacheta fired again. Crack! A man's hat flew from his head. He wasn't shooting to kill. He was disarming them. He was toying with them. He was a ghost on the ridge, a master of the land, and they were clumsy, terrified fools. "He's trying to draw us out," Brody yelled. "Hold your ground. He's just one man." "Sheriff!" a man on the far side of the perimeter screamed. "Look! To the east! Riders!" Ellie's blood ran cold. This was not Akacheta. This was a new group. A line of perhaps 10 riders appeared on the opposite ridge, the one closest to the town. They were not settlers. They were warriors, their shapes unmistakable. At their front was a man, large and imposing, wearing a full war bonnet. The posse was trapped, caught between Akacheta on one ridge and a new war band on the other. "It's Sarpan!" Croft shrieked. "He was luring us in! We're done for! We're all dead!" The cabin was now burning in earnest. The smoke was thick. Ellie broke the window with the poker and gasped for air. She had to choose, burn or be shot. The warrior on the eastern ridge raised his lance. He shouted, a long, rolling war cry. And from the northern ridge, Akacheta shouted back, not a war cry, a single word, "Sapa!" The name echoed across the valley. The war band on the ridge stopped. Their leader, Sapan, stared across the frozen expanse at the man he thought he had murdered. The posse was frozen, watching, understanding nothing but the raw hatred in that cry. Sapan shouted in Lakota, his voice full of disbelief and rage. Akacheta shouted back. It was a torrent of words, an accusation, a challenge. "What are they saying?" Brody yelled to no one. Sapan, enraged, spurred his horse, and his warriors followed, charging not at the posse, but toward Akacheta. "They're fighting each other," a man yelled. Akacheta did not retreat. He kicked Pilgrim and charged down the ridge, meeting Sapan's band in the flat, open snowfield between the two ridges. It was a melee. Horses wheeled, men yelled, but it was not a battle. Akacheta, armed with the superior Spencer rifle, fired. Not at Sapan, but at the two men closest to him, the two who had been with him during the betrayal. He shot them from their saddles. The other warriors, stunned, pulled up. They recognized Akacheta. They recognized the man Sapan had told them was murdered by whites. Sapan, his face a mask of fury, threw his rifle aside and pulled a knife. He charged Akacheta. Akacheta dropped the Spencer, tossing it into the snow. He swung off Pilgrim and pulled Thomas's old skinning knife from his belt. This would be decided by the knife, the way it was supposed to end. The two cousins circled each other in the snow, in the valley of firelight and gunfire, as two groups of enemies watched, breathless. The fight was brutal and fast. Sapan was larger, fueled by rage. Akacheta was faster, fueled by a cold, precise justice. They cut, lunged, and bled in the snow. Meanwhile, at the cabin, the porch roof collapsed. Flames were now inside. "The woman!" Brody yelled, his lawman's duty overriding his fear. "She's still in there!" He ran to the burning door, shielding his face. Jaden Croft, seeing his chance, saw his true enemy. Not Sapan. Akacheta. He was the one who had cost him his land, his dignity. Croft raised his rifle, took careful aim at Akacheta's back, who was locked in combat with Sapan. "Jaden, no!" Brody yelled, seeing the move. Crack. Brody, in a single motion, had drawn his pistol and fired. Not at the Lakota. He shot Jaden Croft's rifle, splitting the forestock. Croft cried out, dropping the useless weapon. "This," Brody panted, his face grim, "is not our fight." In the valley, the duel ended. Akacheta, with a lightning-fast move, disarmed Sapan, sending his knife spinning. He slammed his rival to the ground, his own knife at Sapan's throat. Sapan lay panting, defeated. The valley was silent. Akacheta did not kill him. He stood, breathing heavily. He spoke in Lakota, his voice carrying on the cold air. He was banishing him. He was declaring him an outcast, a wanagi, a ghost with no people. Sapan's remaining warriors, seeing their new leader shamed and defeated by the man he had betrayed, turned their horses. They didn't help Sapan. They rode away, disappearing back over the eastern ridge. Akacheta was left alone in the field, standing over his defeated cousin. Sapan, in the ultimate disgrace, scrambled to his feet, found his horse, and rode away, alone. Akacheta stood, the victor. He turned, his eyes finding the burning cabin. Brody was dragging a smoke-choked, coughing Ellie out of the doorway. He got her clear just as the main roof beams gave way, sending a shower of sparks into the sky. Akacheta, Brody, and Ellie, the three of them, alone in the valley. The posse was silent, their mob fury extinguished, replaced by awe and confusion. Akacheta walked to his horse, picked up the Spencer rifle and mounted. He looked at Brody and nodded once, a sign of respect. Then he looked at Ellie. She was on her knees, coughing, her face black with soot, her home a roaring inferno behind her. Their eyes locked across the snow. No words were possible. He had saved her. She had saved him. The debt was paid. He turned pilgrim south, away from his people, away from the town. He kicked the horse into a gallop and didn't look back, disappearing into the vast, dark wilderness. The silence that fell on the valley was absolute, broken only by the roar and crackle of Ellie Hayes's burning home. Sheriff Brody helped her to her feet. The posse gathered, their faces pale and stunned in the firelight. They were no longer a lynch mob. They were just cold, scared men who had witnessed something they didn't understand. Jaden Croft nursed his hand, his eyes burning with a hatred that was now impotent. "Sheriff," one of the men started, his voice shaking. What just happened?" Brody looked at the burning ruin, then at Croft, then at Ellie. He was the law, and the law required a story. "What happened," Brody said, his voice hard and final, "is that Sapan's war band, the ones who hit the Miller place, came here looking to finish the job." He pointed to Croft. Mr. Croft, in his eagerness, set fire to the cabin. In the confusion, Mrs. Hayes was near trapped. He then gestured to the ridge where Akacheta had been. "And that other fella. Seems Sapan had more than one enemy." "But who was he?" the miner asked. "He was a ghost, son," Brody said, spitting. "A fellow who didn't like Sapan. And he's gone. That's the end of it." He walked over to Croft. "Jaden, you're under arrest for reckless endangerment, arson, and inciting a riot." "You can't," Croft sputtered. "I just did," Brody said, pulling Croft's hands behind his back. "You nearly got us all killed. You're done here." The ride back to Prosperity Creek was silent. Brody put Ellie on his own horse, and he walked beside her. They left Jaden Croft to ride his, tied to the saddle. The story Sheriff Brody told, the one that went into the official record, was simple. Ellie Hayes, a brave widow, had been attacked by Sapan's band. A rival Lakota faction, led by an unknown warrior, had intervened, driving Sapan off. The cabin was lost in the fight. The town, desperate for a hero and ashamed of its panic, accepted this story. They held a barn raising and rebuilt Ellie's home in a single week. Ellie Hayes lived. She stayed on her land. She never spoke of Akacheta. She never corrected Brody's story. She remained an outsider. But she was no longer harassed. She was treated with a new, quiet respect. The women of the town, who once whispered about the odd widow, now brought her pies and quilts. They saw her as a survivor. Jaden Croft lost everything. His militia was a disgrace. He was fined heavily and became a pariah. He sold his ranch for pennies on the dollar and left the territory a broken man. And Akacheta, he was never seen again. Not by settlers, not by soldiers. But the legend was born. To the settlers of the High Plains, he became known as the Ghost of the Ridge, a phantom protector. They said that in the deep of winter, a lone warrior on a grey horse watched over the passes, ensuring peace. Raids on wagon trains mysteriously failed. Ambushes were found out. Sometimes, a hunting party from Prosperity Creek would find a fresh-killed deer left for them, as if to ward them away from Lakota hunting grounds. But the legend was even stronger among his own people. Akacheta never returned to his band. He could not. Sapon's betrayal had broken the circle. Instead, he became a wanagi, a spirit who lived between worlds. The warriors who had ridden with Sapon told the true story of Akacheta's return from the dead, his honor duel, and his banishment of the betrayer. He became a symbol of true Lakota honor. Not the new honor of war and raids that Sapon preached, but the old honor of truth, of keeping one's word, of protecting the people, even from themselves. He was the man who had befriended white man's blanket, and who had honored that friendship even after death. He was the man who had chosen justice over revenge. He became the legend of the plains. Ellie Hayes lived on that homestead for another 40 years. She never remarried. She watched the plains change, watched the railroad come, watched the buffalo disappear. She watched the world of Akacheta and the world of Thomas vanish. But every year, on the first heavy snow, she would find it. On her porch, tucked into the doorframe, where the wind couldn't take it, she would find a single, perfect eagle feather, its tip freshly dipped in red paint, the color of life. She would take it and place it in the willow wood box with her husband's pipe. And so, the story of Ellie Hayes and Akacheta ends. But the legend never did. It lives on in the whistle of the wind across the prairie, a reminder that courage isn't about fighting. It's about surviving and knowing what to save. It's a story of a woman who saw a human being, not an enemy, and a man who repaid that debt by saving not just her life, but the soul of his people. If this story of the Old West, of betrayal and of an honor that crossed all boundaries, moved you, please help us keep these legends alive. Hit that like button, share this story with someone who appreciates the real, complex history of the West, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more true-life storytelling that you won't find anywhere else. Let us know in the comments what part of their story will stay with you the most. We'll see you in the next one.